Right, good evening, folks. This evening, my very special guest is somebody I've known for the best part of about 18 odd years. Met him a number of times. Then again, you can't miss him. You'll see why in a moment. He is what I would call a bass player supremo. The reason why I say that is because the people he's played with are what we would call top class. The person I'm speaking about is the one and only Mr. Dave Swift. How you doing, Dave?
I'm very well, thank you indeed. How are you?
I am not too bad. First, let me say thank you very much for your time today because it's
Oh,
been
my pleasure.
watching you play has been just mind blowing. And I know that we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff, all bass related.
Mhm.
But we will start with this. How long have you been playing bass?
Okay, I actually didn't start out as a bass player. I started out as a trombonist when I was at school. That was my first instrument. So I played trombone, played a little bit of euphonium and tuba, but trombone was the prominent instrument. So I started to play that when I was at school. I think when I was 14, and I had lessons with a visiting teacher there. So I guess you could say I
Okay.
was classically trained on the trombone. But then I took up the bass a year later, so I was 15 when I took up bass guitar, and then my trombone teacher encouraged me to also take up the double bass. Which happened very quickly. So it would have been like within a couple of months of each other from taking up the bass guitar to the double bass. So yeah, I was still at school. I was 15, so that would have been 1979 when I took up the bass. However long ago that was.
Well, we won't go into that. We won't go into the specifics, but watching you play over the years has been, for want of a better word, for me, an inspiration.
Mhm.
Because I know you, we've seen each other many places, we always stop and have a chat.
Mhm.
But whenever I do see you, we don't talk enough because it's too noisy because it's at a bass show, or it's too busy because we're at where are we? A bass masterclass or something like that.
Sure,
So
sure.
standing talking is not one of the main priorities at that time.
Yeah,
But
it's
now that this has happened,
mm,
we call it lockdown, it has worked out so that we can actually talk and enjoy it as opposed to got to run, got to get there.
yeah,
Now,
yeah, absolutely.
over the years, I have watched you playing, and the one thing that stands in my mind is your presence on a stage. Now, a lot of people say, oh, the bass player is just a person at the back. Actually, no, he is not. He is the glue that holds it all together with assistance from the drummer. That's how I see it.
Mhm.
Now, I've watched you play with quite a few people, but the main thing is every year, without fail, around about 11:30, I switch the old TV on, and there you are with Jools Holland and friends. Because you then have bands from all over the world on one stage. That must be a massive stage to have all those bass
Yeah, I mean,
players
because
in
it's
one
all done at the
place.
BBC TV studios, so it's a
Ah,
pretty big room.
that's big. That is big. Now, I've been in some big rooms, but when I look at that, the camera keeps on constantly panning, and I'm thinking, when is it going to stop?
Yeah, yeah.
But everyone's having fun. Now, you've been doing the Jules gig for a number of years,
Hmm.
and playing with him is obviously a lot of work because there's a lot to do.
Sure, sure.
But how did you get into playing with Jules?
Okay, well, I was already a professional musician, so I left school when I was 16 in 1980.
Hmm.
I worked very briefly in a music shop, but then I pretty much turned professional. And so I was really a session musician. I was doing lots of TV themes and film music and radio jingles, and I worked a lot on the cruise ships as well. When I was
Ah,
in my early 20s, I did about four different cruise ships. So that was fun, traveling all over the world. But at the end of the 80s, I just decided I wanted a change. When I say a change of life, I still wanted to be a professional musician, but I wanted to play with different types of musicians. I wanted to play with more creative improvising musicians.
Mm.
So I moved to London in 1988, and I was just doing loads of jazz gigs, mainly on double bass. Actually, I wasn't playing much bass guitar at all. So I was doing lots of jazz venues, playing with all different types of players. But again, it was improvised music, which I hadn't done much of prior to that. So,
Okay.
and at the time, I was working with a saxophone player who had got the Jools Holland gig, but the Jools Holland gig wasn't as it is now. Back then, it was a smaller band. It was a 9-piece band. He didn't have his TV show. He didn't have a radio show. He wasn't the personality that he is now. So we're talking 1991 at this stage. So a friend of mine had already got the gig, and Jools needed a bass player because Jools was using Pino Palladino,
Oh wow.
of course, who I'm sure every bass player on the planet knows who he is.
Oh yes.
He's a giant in every sense of the word. And so Pino was playing with him, and also the bass player with Squeeze at the time was doing some work. But Jools was looking for a double bass player. He'd only used bass guitarists. He really wanted someone who played double bass. So he put the word out to his musicians, and the saxophone player that I was doing jazz gigs with said to me, Jools needs a bass player. Do you want to come along and audition? And I said, yeah, sure, why not? So I knew Jools from being in the band Squeeze. I knew him from being on the TV show The Tube, which was a live music show back in the 80s that he co-presented with Paula Yates. But I wasn't aware of him now as a solo artist. But again, as I said, in 1991, it was pre-TV and radio shows. So I said, yeah, sure, why not? So I went along to his studio here in Southeast London, and there was Jools and our guitarist. And I just got my double bass out, and Jools said, let's just play. Let's just jam. And we did this for however long. I honestly can't remember. It was probably at least half an hour, maybe longer. And at the end of it, I really enjoyed it, and it was fun. And I'm putting my double bass away, and Jools said, "Well, that was really great, sounded fantastic, but we've more people to see." And I just assumed that meant,
yeah,
you
what that means, yeah. Come, we'll call you, yeah.
But it was fine because, to be honest with you, I was really happy just being in London, because I'm originally from Wolverhampton in the West Midlands, so I was just thrilled to be in the capital. Playing jazz. So when he said that, I wasn't, there wasn't like
you weren't phased by it or anything. Yeah.
Back in the bass way, he goes outside with a guitar player. They must have had a quick chat, and they came back in 5 minutes later, and Jools just went, "Okay, listen, just the gig's yours. It's all good. You've got the gig." And I think he actually gave me a carrier bag full of cassette tapes. That's how long ago. And it was basically some of his music. It was some live versions of some of his music. And he said, "Okay, take this away, learn this stuff, and then we'll have a rehearsal in a week's time or something like that." So that was it. I got the Jools gig there and then at his studio on the day of my audition. So
that's very different to some of the auditions I've ever heard of. But you know what? It's good when you can get it like that, because you've been with him for so many years now.
Yeah. This is actually quite a celebratory year for me, because it's my 30th year with him this year. So
wow,
long time.
That's a long time to be doing music with one person.
Absolutely, yeah.
But obviously you love doing it because you're there doing it. So hey, what can you say?
Yeah, and you say one person, but that was the beauty of the Jools gig, because when I started with him, it was just Jools' band playing mostly R&B and blues type music, and that was great. I was very happy doing that. But then, of course, when he got the TV show, which happened a year after I got the gig. His regular TV series on BBC Two, which became later the Jools Holland. And then the following year, the Hootenanny New Year's Eve show kicked in. So all of our lives changed quite dramatically, because we just went from being a touring R&B band to being a house band on TV, playing with all this constant stream of
different.
It's like a conveyor belt of iconic artists and stars. So that was quite a shock to the system because none of us saw that coming,
Really?
probably including Jules himself. So
Well, when you put that kind of work in, you the result that you get has got to be a good one, because no one can be doing music as long as that, especially like Jools Holland, and think, yeah, well, I'm only doing this little thing in the corner. But you know what? I'm glad it is where it is, because it gives me something to look forward to every year now.
sure,
So
sure.
I might only see you once a year at a bass show as we normally do,
Mhm.
but at least I know come the end of the year I'll be seeing him again. So it's all
Yeah.
good.
Well, it's that there's a saying that I like to use, and and the gig has been great for me. It's kept me very busy. It's enabled me to play with countless iconic, legendary artists. But I always say to people, the harder you work, the luckier you get. I like to use that
Hmm.
term because, but also, people say to me, they say, "Oh, Dave, you're so lucky to have that gig." Well, there is an element of luck that comes into it, but it's as much about hard work, tenacity,
Yeah.
determination, all of those things. The luck side of things is a small
A
part of
very
it. So like I
tiny
said,
part of it.
the
Yeah.
harder you work, the luckier you get.
Hmm.
And the thing also, if you just say someone is lucky, it's like it makes a suggestion that there's no effort involved. If you just say someone's lucky, so for instance, if you just get like a lottery ticket, you get a lucky dip lottery ticket,
Hmm.
you do that, and then you win like 10 million quid. Now that's lucky
Yeah.
because there isn't a huge amount of effort there. You know,
Scratch a card.
yeah,
Yeah. Hmm.
exactly. Just a
That's
couple of
about it. Yeah. Hmm.
there's a lot more luck involved. But when people say to me, "Oh, you're so lucky," but I think, well, I hope you guys realise the time and effort and the
Yeah. The
sacrifice
months
that
I've put
goes
into
into
all of,
that
yeah.
to get
Hmm.
to that stage. That's the thing. But yeah, but luck does come into it, and also timing as well. For instance, when I moved to London at that stage, if I'd have moved to London a couple of years later,
Hmm.
maybe even earlier, or if I'd have moved to a different area of London other than Southeast, everything could have been different. Yeah, I mean, I discovered something recently. My old trombone teacher, a guy called Phil Johnson, is still with us. Is still around in the West Midlands.
Oh wow.
And I linked up with him a few months ago. I hadn't seen him for like 30 odd years. And I didn't realize that when I went to him for trombone lessons at school, I was 14, which was quite late.
Hmm.
Normally he only took on pupils who had just got secondary school, and I didn't realize that he fought for me to keep me on as a student because the school would say to him, don't take on any students any older than say 11 or 12 or 13, whatever. So when I went along and he took me, I only just discovered that he made a huge effort to have me as his pupil because, like I said, at 14 I was on the verge of getting closer to leaving school.
That's right. Yeah. So once
You
you've
know,
gone,
and,
that's
and,
it.
there's,
Yeah.
and there's not usually enough time there to teach a child an instrument. They like to teach the kids when they're like 11 or younger.
Hmm.
So I didn't find that out until a few months ago that he did that for me. So say for instance, if he'd have followed the guidelines, and he could have said to me, "I'm sorry, I'd love to take you on, but
Yeah.
you at
But
14,
yeah. Hmm. Can't
it's
do it.
too late. You're too old. I'm really sorry." Man, my whole life could have changed on
That's
on that
true.
moment.
That's true.
You know,
Everything. I always say everything happens for a reason.
sure,
Everything happens for a reason.
yeah.
Now we spoke earlier, and asked you if you could think of 5 songs that mean something to you and you're playing. Now, every time I ask a musician this question, they say, "Oh, that's tricky. That's difficult." And I know it is because every day I think, "Well, I've asked the question, but what would I do?" So I thought, think of 5 songs, and I couldn't because there's at least 30, and I'm trying to push that out to get to the 5, and it's tricky at best.
Yeah, yeah.
The best one I got was Mike Horn. He's a drummer.
Okay.
He got it down to 7, and I thought, I'm impressed. But then he said to me, "Well, drummers can't really count, so that's the reason why." And I thought, I've heard that before. But let's see what we come up with, Dave. Now, so your five, what are they, sir, and what does it mean to
Okay,
you?
so these um, really aren't in any particular order.
Hmm.
Perhaps apart from the first one. Okay, so like I said, I was a trombonist, so I was playing in lots of different bands on the trombone. Like every type of music you could imagine, I was playing in orchestras, jazz bands, funk bands, brass bands, all sorts of things. And I just started to play bass. So I was my only knowledge of bass players was what I could see on the TV on Top of the Pops
Hmm.
and on the tube, Jules' thing. So a friend of mine who was a fellow trombone player, he just said, "You've just started to play the bass. Uh, you need to check this guy out." And he actually brought in a Weather Report album
Oh.
to one of the rehearsals. So we were sitting there with our trombones, and he gave me this album, and it's a 1980 album of Weather Reports called Night Passage. And he said, you've got to listen to this guy. And I'm thinking, well, who's he talking about? So I'm looking at the personality. It said like Jaco Pastorius. I'm
Hmm.
thinking, who's that? Never heard
Didn't
of
mean
him.
anything to you at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. So I took that album home and I put it on. And actually, the very first track is the title track. It's Night Passage.
Hmm.
Now, it's interesting in the fact that Jaco's not doing big solos on there. He's not going completely nuts, not until later in the album. But he's just really sassy walking bass lines, really confident, just really sexy like a walking bass line kind of thing. More like, and because I was, into jazz more than anything
Mm-hmm.
else, and I'd already started to work on walking bass lines. So, but this was something else. It was a different level of sophistication, So yeah, Night Passage was. So it's the first time I ever heard him play. It's the first album, but it's the first track. So Night Passage will always be special to me because it's the first time I heard the great Jaco Pastorius.
Wow. Everyone hears Jacko in different ways and different forms, but yours is very different because most people would have followed him from whenever to wherever, and
Yeah.
this is the first time you'd heard him, and you just picked up from there.
Yeah, because he'd already been. So obviously he'd done other albums with Red Report, and even his solo album
Hmm.
was already out 5 years before that. But I
Oh.
I think it's always important, the first time you hear someone or you encounter something is really evocative.
Hmm.
It's a really important thing. And it might not be the best thing they did, or it may not be the most flamboyant thing they did. But sometimes just the first time you hear them that's what makes it special.
Oh.
So a Night Passage, the Weather Report album, a lot of people, they won't use that as their favorite Weather Report album. They'll name
Something.
other.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird, and maybe if I'd have heard a different one that first time, it would change for me. But it was just that was the one my friend happened to have.
Hmm.
Like I said, my fellow trombone player friend, and he lent it to me, and my mind was just it was
Blown.
completely blown because the thing with Jacko as well, when I first heard him, so I heard him before I heard the other greats like Stanley Clarke and Marcus Miller and all those
Hmm.
guys. I heard Jacko slightly earlier, and I just remember thinking, that's how the bass should sound. That's how the bass should be played. That's how I want to play it. you
Hmm.
know, it really just everything just clicked
Ah.
together for me. So
Okay. Well,
so yeah, so
that's
that
very
album,
different. Oh.
that album and that track are yeah very very important to me.
Ah, now track number two. What would you have for that one?
Okay, again, this isn't in any particular order, so
Mm-hmm.
do forgive me. But this is how I've just written them down. So it is Jacko again,
Mm-hmm.
and this is from his solo album, which I think was released. Well, it was recorded in 1975. I think it came out in '76, and it's just called Jaco Pastorius. Now that really did blow everyone's minds because the stuff he's doing on that album, including playing Donna Lee, playing the solos on it and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. It's incredible. But I think the track I'm choosing from that is actually called "Come On, Come Over," which is it's actually I think it's the only track on there that features vocals, and it's Sam and Dave. who were on there, you know, and obviously they're a very, very famous soul
That's right. Yeah.
singer in a duo. And in fact, I've worked with one of them. I've worked with Sam Moore. He
Wow.
actually came to Jules's Hootenanny show one year, and we did some classic soul songs with him. I think we did Soul Man and Hold On, I'm Coming, you know.
Yeah. Oh,
But yeah,
okay.
but he's singing with Sam and Dave are on this Jacob Astorius track, and I say it's called "Come On, Come Over," and it's kind of like a funk line, you know, but just playing lots of 16th notes,
Mm.
you know. But it's just, and you know, the accuracy of it, you know, it's just so perfect, and it just percolates along and it bubbles along. But it's, you know, you've really got to have some chops to
To
do
keep
that,
up
and
with
your
that. Yeah.
timing's got to be impeccable, and it's very, very tasteful. So, but again, you know, with both of those tracks that I've just mentioned, the thing I liked about them was, and I definitely took from them. You know, I learned them, I transcribed them, and I definitely was using them in my what gigs I was doing, and that's
Mm.
what I loved about. You know, some of the solo stuff he did, although I worked on it and I transcribed it, it wasn't that applicable to what I was doing.
Oh, okay.
What was more useful to me were his bass lines, where I could actually fit or take little snippets of them and put into the
What you
gigs
were
that I
doing.
was doing. So that's why I loved Come On, Come Over. Because
Oh.
again, it's not a solo, it's a really tasty, funky bass line.
But yeah. Mm.
You know, but I knew that I could use it. It was going to be applicable in
In what
the
you were
things
doing.
that I was doing. You know.
Wow. Everyone's got a different take on playing from what they've learned or from what they listen to. But then when you listen to like I've got your list and I'm thinking now I can understand why he plays the way he plays. And believe me, I've seen you play a few times, and
Yeah.
your what's the word? Your playing style is very on it,
Uh-huh.
as in every note is meant to be that note. There is no let me slide into this or whatever. No, 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 no.
Well, here's the thing on the Jules' show. You know, we are technically we're playing covers of songs, but we're playing them with the original artists.
Yeah, mm.
You know what I mean? Whereas a lot of people might play those songs in a cover band,
Yeah.
but they're not playing with, you
Not
know.
the
So
song. Yeah, yeah. It's different. It's going to
yeah.
be
So for
different.
instance, if
Mm.
I've had to play Ain't Nobody and I'm Every Woman with Shaka Khan,
Mm.
which I've had to do several times in my life, you know, it's important for me to have that accuracy of it, you know. So I will make sure that I will listen to the albums, I'll listen to studio recordings, I'll listen to live versions of it, I will do transcriptions, you know, I'll make notes of any changes. And the thing is, the reason why it's important to do is if you go along to a TV recording and you have only learned an approximation of what's on the record, you know, sometimes the artist will notice that.
Oh,
You
because they
know,
wrote it. Yeah, they would do. Yeah.
they'll turn around and say, you know, it's all very good, but it's not what's on the record. And more often than
Ah.
not, the artist wants exactly
What
what's
is
on
on
the
the
record.
record?
So that's why I'm so meticulous with
Mm.
transcriptions and learning the exact parts. And it's a great discipline as well. It's really interesting getting inside the mind of the bass player who you're getting
Who you
the
get the
line
feel
from.
from? Yeah.
And then what happens is when you then play with these artists, they can turn around and say, listen, you don't have to do it exactly as the record.
Hmm.
You can elaborate, you know, you can free it up a little bit, which is fine, and that has happened. But then I think it's still important to have the original completely nailed,
Yeah.
so you know it inside out.
Because then the singer's going to be very comfortable performing, knowing that
Exactly.
you're there doing exactly what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, that's right, You know, and like I said, with the Jacko stuff, that's the reason why I love all of his solos. But I used to work more on the more baseline type of stuff that he
Hmm.
did because I knew that was going to be more useful to me
Oh,
to
okay.
use on my own gig. So Come On, Come Over is such a cool, funky bass line. So yeah, definitely worth checking out.
Well, all these songs that you're mentioning, we're going to actually play them after anyway. So whoever hasn't heard, which I'm very surprised if you haven't, you're about to. That's how it's going to work. Now, what's number 3, I believe?
Okay. Well, I'm going to break it up a little bit here. So I'm going to mention James Jamerson,
Oh yes.
who, I mean, most of the space players of a certain age, we didn't know who he was.
Mm-hmm.
But my goodness, we definitely heard him when we were kids. So James Jamerson was the bass player that played on a lot of Motown
Yeah, about
hits.
90% of them to be yeah. Mm.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, never got credited on the albums along with the other musicians. But I remember as a kid, there was a family that lived across the road from me because I'm part of a family of three brothers, and the family across the road had predominantly daughters and one son. So I would go out and hang with him, and his sisters would be playing lots of Motown records,
Ah.
Gladys Knight and Marvin Gaye, Tammy Terrell, all these people. And I loved that music. And I remember kind of hearing the bass pumping away at the bottom, but this was before I became a bass player. I just loved the music. So I've always been a big fan of it. And then years later, I think, that book came out, which was called Standing in the Shadows of Motown. And
That's
it was
right. Yeah.
dedicated to James Jamerson, and it was a book of his transcribed bass lines from a lot of those classic Motown recordings. And then it was great because all of a sudden everyone knew who he was. Sadly, it was long overdue, but he
After he
had
passed,
already
yeah.
passed away in the 80s. But that his bass playing, he's the godfather of it all. I think if it wasn't for him, there probably wouldn't have been a Jacko or
True.
Rocco Prestia from Tower of Power. Jamerson wrote the book on super cool, funky, groovy bass lines. And he was, interestingly, James Jamerson was a double bass player originally. He was a jazz double bass player.
Oh.
And then he eventually went on to bass guitar. And for a while he played both, but I think towards, later on, he predominantly stuck on bass guitar.
Yeah.
So if you listen to his bass lines, they're very melodic, they're very inventive. They're so detailed. There's so much stuff going on in there, and I think it's because he was a jazz musician
First, yeah.
prior to that on the double bass, so he was listening to more complex harmonies. Because back, like a lot of other R&B bass lines back then, and soul bass lines were not that complex. They were a lot simpler. But I think because he'd come from a jazz background, he was more aware of complex harmonies and complex rhythms. And so he brought all of that jazz knowledge into the R&B
Arena.
Motown world, And his bass lines are crazy. I mean, even now, some of them are not easy to play, even in these modern day times. And anyway, so there's lots of them I love. There's so many Jamerson bass lines that I love, but I think my favorite it's called Darling Dear. And it's on a Jackson 5 album, and I think it's actually called Third Album, is the name of it.
Okay.
It was released in 1970. And it really is one of my favorite all-time bass lines by any bass player. But yeah, Darling Dear, it's like every bar is different. There's no repetition there at all. Every bar is a work of art.
In its own right, yeah.
Complete genius. I just, every time I listen to it, I don't know. I think, how did you think of that? Where on earth?
Where was your mind when you started? Yeah.
And the great one of the many things I love about it is if you take that transcription, that bass line in particular, if you just isolate one bar at a time, you could make complete song, a complete song,
bar, yeah.
Just that one bar. If you just looped it, and you think there's a lot of bars in that song, that every bar is a gem. It's the most beautiful playing and so inventive, so creative that, you could just, and a lot of songs are made up of just one chord or one riff or whatever. Right. But seriously, if you listen to that line, you could make whole songs out of just every single bar if you isolated.
I'm going to look into that myself now, yeah.
They're so hooky, his lines are so hip. And yeah, he's absolute genius, really. It's kind of a shame that he didn't live long enough to know how much he was appreciated, admired,
and
loved,
influenced by, yeah.
that he had. But I guess at the time, like a lot of those musicians, they were just paid to do the session.
That's
They
it.
got the money, they did what they did, and then they got out of there. But what they were doing was
Setting a trend,
monumental.
if anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Now, number 4.
Mhm. Okay. Right. Which order should I do these in now?
Now, this is
Okay.
the part I
Oh,
like.
I think I'm gonna. Okay, I'm gonna come back to Jacko. I know it's.
Mm-hmm.
We've already had a couple, but I'm gonna have to come back to him because again, he was the first of all the more flamboyant bass players that I
Yep.
became aware of. You know, there's loads of others that I love, but he was the first one that I really became aware of. So there's a very famous track that he wrote called Teen Town.
Oh, yeah.
And I think Teen Town was the name of some like arcade that he used to hang out in as a kid, like an amusement arcade for teenagers in the States. I think I could be wrong on that. But there's a couple of versions of it. But it's one of those things that a lot of bass players, they pride themselves on learning because it's a solo. You know, the bass is playing the tune, and it's being doubled up by Joe Zawinul, who was the keyboard player in Weather Report. But it's a Jacko song, and it's tricky to play. It's not for the faint-hearted.
No, if you get
But
into that,
lots
you
of
need
people.
to go in there 100%. You can't go in there 50-50. It doesn't work.
Oh yeah, exactly. You know, and it's such a cool, it's such a cool song, and it's a great thing to play on the bass. But um, it is on one of the Weather Report albums, but it's actually kind of quite short. I mean, most people play Teen Town, they just do the studio version of it because it's not very long. You know?
Mm.
But my favorite version, it's on a Weather Report album, and it's called 8:30 is the name of the album,
Oh,
which was
okay.
released in 1979. So yeah, 8:30, because apparently the reason why it was called that was when Weather Report went on tour. That's the time of the evening that they usually started their gigs. It was,
Now
you
you say that, it makes sense. It does make sense. I thought, why would they? But yeah, now didn't
yeah.
know that.
So,
Mm.
and the album's interesting in the fact that it should have been like a whole live album, but I read somewhere that the sound engineer erased some of the tracks accidentally, so
Fill
they
it
had to
in.
make it up with some studio stuff.
Oh,
But it is
yeah.
predominantly a live album. So, and the Teen Town version from that is just off the scale. It's because it's super fast as well. I think it's
Yeah.
much faster than the studio
The
version.
studio, but yes, it is. Yeah. Yeah.
So Jacko plays the thing, but then it all it just completely goes nuts. The whole band kick off, and it just takes off like a jet kind of thing. And
Mm.
just the energy and the virtuosity and the inventiveness and just the bravado. It's just these guys must have been so, I don't know what's the word, just so energized when they were doing it. You listen to it and it always makes me smile. It really does makes me laugh because it's just so incredible. It's such an incredible performance by Weather Report and
Mm.
particularly Jacko, and he's doing all sorts of crazy stuff
Well, there's
throughout it.
there's
So yeah, so
in
Teen
me.
Town, but the
Mhm.
live version from 8:30 album is the one that I would recommend.
Well, what I have found in music, that's the only form, and only music can do this. It
Mm.
will actually make you smile, laugh, or cry at the same time.
Yeah.
Because you're going to hear something and think, what on earth did he do? When you play it again, you're going to think, he must be nuts to do that, but that's what he's doing, and that's how it comes
Yeah.
out. But if
Yeah.
it puts a smile on your face, it
Yeah.
makes you feel good. And
Yeah,
as
I mean,
far as I know, only music can do that. There is no
yeah, I
drug
mean
that can do that yet,
yeah.
but there you go.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In fact, some Weather Report stuff, you listen to it, and I was before I became a musician, I always used to sing in choirs. I sang in the school choir, but I sang in a church choir for 9 years, from when I was 10 to when I was 19. So I was
Wow.
singing music before I was playing it, and I'm not an overly religious person. I like to think of myself as a spiritual person. But
I
I
can understand
remember,
that, yeah.
there were certain hymns I used to love. There was certain church and choral music that I always found
Mm.
very, very moving. and you listen to some of the Weather Report stuff. So I mean, that track is really crazy, frenetic. But some of the ballads they do, some of the quieter stuff, it's like it feels like you're in church.
Yeah.
Some of those Weather Report tracks, in a silent way, a remark you made, and you're absolutely right. You hit the nail on the head. I think the reason why Jacko is so important to me is that all the other bass players that I love, they make me sort of laugh and smile, dance. They make me feel energized, all that kind of stuff. But I think Jacko was the only one that could actually, same thing as you said, go through more emotions. He could do all those things, but he could bring tears to my eyes, and make you feel very sort of spiritual or whatever. It's and that's quite an impressive thing for a bass player to do. It's like you'd expect someone who was a concert pianist or
to be able to do that. Yeah, that's right.
A singer, but but yeah, you're absolutely right. He has always made me feel so many different emotions, and that's why I've picked 3 tracks with him. That's how important he was and how important he is. So.
Now, what is the last track? Because the last track is one of my favorites. But go for it.
Now, people always say to me, "Who is your favorite bass player of all time?" Now, it's really tricky because I always want to say Jacko, but then Anthony Jackson is one of my. He really is one of my all-time greats. So I would even probably go as far as to say, who is your favorite bass player? If it's someone who's no longer with us, I would say Jacko. Someone who is still very much with us, I say Anthony Jackson. In fact, and here's an interesting thing. My son, Oscar, he's got a couple of middle names, and one of them is Anthony. Okay. And the reason why we gave him that name, one is because of Anthony Jackson. I'm a big fan. And Anthony was one of Jacko's names as well.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So my son, Oscar, he's one of his middle names is my 2 all-time favorite players. So I didn't become aware of Anthony Jackson until afterwards, and you start to read guitar magazines and you start to read interviews, and at some point it will give you the names of people that you should check out. And his name, it kept coming up. So I thought, wow, I need to do this. And so the track I've picked, it's probably the one he's most commercially famous for, and it's the track is For the Love of Money.
Yes.
And it's by the OJs. I think it came out in 1973. And it's really interesting because, I really love playing with the pick myself. When I started to play bass, I began with the pick before I played my fingers. So I like a lot of other pick players, including, Carol Kay and Steve Swallow and Bobby Vega, people like this. But with Anthony, although he plays a lot with the pick, he's not a rock player. And most people associate the pick
with a rock player,
with that genre or metal or whatever. But Anthony, really is a session player, but he's definitely, you definitely wouldn't call him a rock player, but he's done a lot of beautiful pick work over the years. And this For the Love of Money, it actually starts with him playing the bass guitar with a pick. And it's kind of like almost like a guitar riff. He's playing like a funk, what a rhythm guitar player would normally do. And it's interesting as well in the fact that he's using an old phaser pedal and a phaser effects pedal, but they're also putting him through an echo pedal as well. The echo's being brought in and out. But it's such a cool, funky, hip line. And it's so crucial to the song because that's how the song starts. So whenever you're out and about and you're in a club or a bar and you hear Anthony's pick play, that's For the Love of Money. What the song is before anyone has sung a word. So that's pretty impressive. And it became such an integral part of the song. It was an integral part of the song that they gave him writing credits for it. So if you look on the credits, I think it might be it might be Gamble and Huff, or I'm not quite sure on that, but it definitely says Anthony Jackson on there. The bass player got a writing credit because he just came up with this cool riff. And then after that, I started to check out a lot more of Anthony. And I religiously studied his playing. I transcribed lots of his stuff. I went out and tried to buy every album I could find with him on there. He did lots of great stuff with Shaka Khan.
That's
A
right.
lot of his
Yeah.
commercial stuff was with Shaka Khan. But he also played a lot with a great guitarist called Steve Khan. No relation. Yeah, no relation.
To Shaka. Okay.
So Steve Khan's a great jazz fusion guitarist. And Anthony's playing on that. The band was called Eyewitness. So that was a great band. But again, a lot of pick playing, but it's not rock. It's probably more fusion, jazz, fusion kind of thing. But yeah, so Anthony really is, he's an amazing guy. And I've written a few little mini articles on him. When he's appeared in magazines, they've asked me to do like a little homage to him. And I've met him a few times as well. I've met him a few times. And I also he has his own Federa Anthony Jackson signature 6-string bass. Because he really invented the modern day 6-string bass guitar. He's that important. And so I had to have a Federa Anthony Jackson 6-string bass as well. So I met him at the Federa workshop in Brooklyn, and we hung out, and I see him if he comes to London.
Wow. How often does he come to London?
Again?
How often does he come to London?
Well, I mean, to be honest, he doesn't, not that often, which is the reason why you really have to look out for it. But in more recent years, he's been over with the Japanese piano player called Hiromi.
Oh, yeah. Hiromi, yeah.
And in fact, it's it's a bit weird, actually, because, Anthony had a stroke a few years ago.
Yeah.
Well, my wife, Lucy, and I were with him just prior to him having the stroke.
Oh, no.
We were with him that evening because Lucy and I had gone to see him play with Hiromi at the Jazz Cafe in London. And after the show, he was sitting on the stage while everything was being cleared up. And he sort of called, because we know each other, and he called me up on the stage, and Lucy and I went and sat with him. And we were chatting as usual, just catching up on life. And he was saying, how's the Federa? Are you still enjoying playing it, And he seemed fine. He seemed perfectly fine, just his regular, calm self. And, Anthony speaks very, very slowly as well. He's not like me. He doesn't talk. He doesn't gabble away. And he's very thoughtful with what he says. He's like this kind of guru. He's like this Tibetan monk, that's... If you speak with him, you need to ask him really good questions. You can't just talk about
to warrant a response. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, we were chatting on and getting great with him, and we talked for ages. And then Lucy and I left, and he seemed fine. And the following day, I was back out on tour with Jools, and I got a phone call from the tour manager, and he said to me, Anthony had a stroke last night when he left. So when he left the club with the drummer, Simon Phillips, apparently Anthony fell, and they're not sure if that's when it happened, but he did. They think that when he was leaving the club, when he fell, that he possibly had the stroke that he had. I mean, I can't, categorically say that's the case, but that's what they think happened. So they were asking me how he was when I was chatting with him. Did he seem okay and healthy, which he did, So, but anyway, he wasn't able to do the remainder of the Hiromi tour, so they had to get somebody else in. But he's been in rehabilitation. He's been going to physio and having all sorts of therapy. So, and I've seen him online doing some talks with the Berklee School of Music. So he seems to be fine. He seems to be happy. Whether or not, I don't know what the future holds, what he's planning to do when we're going to get back to work. But his body of work is just incredible. I mean, if you just Google Anthony Jackson and you look at his CV, it's off the scale.
It's a lot of reading, yeah.
And he really is like a giant of the instrument. And like I said, he pretty much invented the modern day 6-string bass, which I prefer to play.
Well, he is one of the reasons why I like to play a 6-string bass.
Yeah.
Because I've seen what he does, and I'm thinking that's impossible because his fingers are so all over it and on point. That's on a 4-string and a 5-string, yeah, but that's difficult. But he just does it.
where he said in an interview, and I think this is a great thing because, he just said, why wasn't the bass guitar 6 strings from the very beginning? Because at the end of the day, see, Anthony sees the bass guitar as a guitar.
Hmm.
It's the lowest
The low end.
pitched
Yeah.
tender of the guitar family. Now, a lot of people say no, it's not a guitar, it's a bass, but it's a bass guitar, and he's always fought for that description of it.
Hmm.
Because I'm a double bass player, so the bass guitar has got more in common with the guitar family than it has with the orchestral string family. It's more connected.
Hmm.
The only reason why the bass guitar had 4 strings, if we're going to use Leo Fender as an example, he wanted to make life easier for double bass players who were having to lug around this huge instrument.
Hmm.
So he's thinking, could we make a more portable version of the double bass? And that's why the electric bass came into play. And double basses had 4 strings.
Hmm.
So Leo thought, okay, this has to have 4 strings as well. But Anthony's saying, technically, it's a guitar. So why didn't it have 6 strings from day one?
Yeah. Mm.
And I kind of like that. I think, well, yeah, fair enough, but like I said, Leo thought I could make a lot of money here for bass players wanting an easier life.
Yeah.
Carrying this around, and maybe if it had put 6 strings on it, the bass, he wouldn't have got the double bass players, because the double bass players would have seen 6 strings and gone, no, we don't want that. But you put 4 on it, and they recognize it. They go, oh, okay, we get that.
That's different, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But I agree with Anthony. The bass guitar, it's a guitar. So what's wrong with 6 strings? It's like, and for me, it's the most versatile instrument to use, because if I'm doing a TV show and I'm playing with 10 different artists playing all manner of music, I know full well if I just had a 4-string bass guitar there,
You'd
at
have
some
trouble.
point,
Yeah. You have to change.
I'm going to be a problem, because I'm not going to be able to play those extra low notes that a 6-string affords. So yeah, for me, I really love playing 6-string, and that's why Anthony is also still so important to me. So
that's very informative. But you know what? Bass will always be bass, in my opinion. It will always be the backbone of any band, trio, duo, whatever, because that's what it does. And depending on what you do with it, will determine the results. And as usual, the results are always going to be brilliant anyway. So that's just my biased opinion.
Well, someone, you often hear people say a band is only as good as its drummer. I don't know. You could also throw the bass into the equation there as well.
Yes, you can.
Because if you've got, with drums, obviously, if you've got a drummer who's not playing in time very well, it's not ideal, but it is just a timing issue. Whereas with a bass player, you've got bad timing, and you can hear the notes as well. So,
oh yeah. So
if a bass player's got bad timing and he's playing wrong notes,
he's got to be on point. He's got to fix that. Oh yeah, got to fix that. Now, before you run off, Dave, we need to know: do you teach at all?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I always have done from forever, but I just haven't made a big thing of advertising it, because
I did notice that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's just that because I'm predominantly a player, like a touring session guy. There's some people out there that specialize in teaching and occasionally do gigs, but for me, it's really the other way around. So I've not made a big thing of advertising, giving lessons, is because, usually in the summer with Jools, I'm away for like a couple of months, and in the winter, the same thing.
Yeah.
Then I'm recording his TV show, his radio show, albums and stuff. So, I don't want to disappoint too many people. So that's the reason why I've kept it fairly low key. But yeah, absolutely. I've always given lessons on double bass guitar and trombone, my first instrument. So.
I shall bear that in mind if ever I pick up the trombone. But there you go. Now, before you run off, because I know time is short, where can we find you on social media?
Okay. I don't do Twitter. I tried it once, and it didn't really work out for me. So I've got a website, which is it's just daveswiftbass.com.
Nice.
And that's got a lot of information there. It does need a bit of updating, I have to admit. But there's a lot of information on me, who I've played with. There's some video clips on there. There's some sound clips from some performances from radio shows, and there's a list of frequently asked questions as well. So there's a lot of stuff on there. Anything that we didn't cover in this talk, there's a lot of questions that I do answer in my frequently asked questions section. So that's my website, daveswiftbass.com. I am on Instagram, and that's just at Dave Swift Bass.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty busy on there because I've got a big bass collection, and a lot of people like to
I've
see.
seen it. Oh yes, I have. I've seen one or two. That's what I'll say, so no one gets into any trouble.
Well, there's a lot of them on Instagram. I probably post more on Instagram than anywhere. I'm on there as Dave Swift Bass, but I'm on Facebook as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have a musician page. It's just a personal page. It's just me, Dave Swift. And the reason why I do that is because I like to interact with people. If I just had a musician page and I just left it, there wouldn't be that interaction. But I enjoy people getting in touch, commenting on my posts, asking me stuff. So I'm just on there as me, Dave Swift.
Nice one.
Facebook.
Well, Dave, thank you very much for your time this evening.
My pleasure.
Please say hello to the family for me. And I see Oscar's getting quite big now, so he's going to want one of your basses soon anyway. But look after yourselves, and most of all, stay safe.
Thank you. You too, man.
Thank you very much.